This is a new episode of Nullpunkt. Today with Omar Bartov, a renowned genocide scholar and Holocaust scholar, scholar of the 20th century and the European history. We speak about legal definitions, political definitions of genocide, and the degree to which definitions such as genocide have the potential to raise awareness and mobilize resistance to policies of genocide as we see it today in Gaza. We also speak about German memory culture in particular, and the way in which memory culture intertwines with questions of genocide, intertwines with questions of comparability, singularity, and other questions. Please also consider this is an independent project. We are very much dependent on your contribution. We have a Patreon, we have a PayPal account. Please consider supporting us in order for us to be capable to continue this project and enjoy the interview with Omar Bartov. Omar Bartov, renowned historian, professor of genocide and Holocaust studies. Welcome to Nullpunkt. I'm happy to have you here. You are known for your research on the history of Eastern Europe, on the Holocaust, on the history of the 20th century, if you may, but you're also known, especially in the last two years, as like one of the very outspoken critics of what you warned might become a genocide in Gaza that Israel is carrying out, and eventually you criticized and also, denounced it as such. You're here for a week now, promoting a book, giving lectures, talking to people in Berlin. I'm just wondering, how has this week been for you? Was there something that's surprising about the conversations you had? Because we spoke earlier, and I think we agree that in Germany, the discourse around Israel-Palestine is still quite different to the discourse around the topic internationally, and even though we're now at a time where there's almost a near consensus on the question of genocide in Gaza in the kind of scholarly community, in the human rights community, this is very far from consensual in knowledge in Germany. So I'm wondering, how was your time here?
Yeah. Thanks for speaking with me. Am I surprised? Look, I've been keeping up with what's happening in Germany, so I wasn't that surprised by that. I would say that much of what I did here was not within the academic environment. It was public talks. And I think that where I spoke and the audiences I spoke to were receptive and indicated the kind of change that has been happening in Germany over the last 2 years. The public opinion has shifted clearly by all accounts. My sense is that the scholarly community, the one that I actually belong to, has been much more cautious about this. So even when I spoke in Frankfurt, which was in the Fritz Bauer Institute, much of the audience was from the public. So I have not had much exchange with my natural colleagues in Germany.
Okay, so you think maybe there isn't actually a scholarly consensus in that regard in Germany so much on the question of genocide?
I don't know if there's a consensus. I think my own impression is people are not talking. So they don't even know if there's a consensus or not, because they're not saying much. That's my sense. And that's not only in Germany, mind you. Germany may be a more extreme case for actually obvious reasons. But this hesitance to speak by people who could and should, because they know more, is quite typical of the academic community right now.
Where do you think that comes from, that hesitancy?
Okay, so in Germany, we know, first of all, it's because of the Holocaust. It's because people want to make sure that they're not accusing Israel, the Jewish state, of carrying out genocide. There's also, I think, a great deal of sensitivity about being accused of being anti-Semitic, which is the kind of allegations that come from Israel and from its diplomatic representatives in this country. And people, it's very uncomfortable to be faced with such allegations, which are spurious, but still hurt. I think more generally for people to sort of bring themselves around to saying that the country that was created in the wake of the Holocaust, in the same year that the Genocide Convention, after all, was adopted, and for similar reasons, because of the crimes of the Nazis, that state would be engaged in genocide is really hard to accept. And I think people are looking for all kinds of reasons to say, well, maybe it isn't quite that.
Why do you think is it so hard to accept? Like, I have my suspicion why that is, but what is your sort of sense why people are so sort of like hesitant to take that at face value?
Look, I mean, I think that there are maybe two clear reasons. One is, as I said before, Israel was, so to speak, the answer to the Holocaust. To think that Israel would be carrying out, it's not the Holocaust, what it's doing, I've defined it as genocide. It's the attempt to destroy a group in whole or in part as such. To think that Israel is doing that is just boggles the mind. And I think that's one issue. The other issue is that it is true that the term genocide has been used often irresponsibly in the sense of what it means legally. People can have their own definitions of genocide and they're welcome to them, but under international law, there's only one definition that matters. And Israel has been accused before of genocide, and there are people who would say, and I would not agree with them, that Israel has always been a genocidal state, that Zionism is a genocidal ideology. I don't subscribe to that opinion. And I think that because of that, there has been a reluctance, including by myself, to use that term for particular Israeli policies unless you become convinced that that is exactly what's going on. So I think that's also part of it, sort of politics around it.
When you speak of that reluctance, I remember that, like, you know, there's colleagues of yours in the field of genocide and Holocaust studies, like Raz Segal, who, you know, came out, I think, 2 weeks or so after October 7th, saying this is like a textbook case for genocide. And you, like you say, you waited longer. You, like, I think your assessment was around the time of like the invasion of Rafah in May 24. When you look back today, do you think was that incorrect, or do you find that like to be the right assessment, that like the genocidal signs were there, but like it wasn't yet clear that it was a genocide? Do you sort of agree with yourself at that time, or do you think like the assessment could have been made earlier?
Look, I mean, it's really a hard question to answer. At the time, I thought that Raz, and I appreciate him and I appreciate his scholarship, I thought it was premature because I just did not see enough evidence. At the time, there were two sets of statements that were being made. One was the sort of official war goals. And the official war goals were to destroy Hamas and to release the hostages. And within the context of what happened on October 7th, which was a war crime and a crime against humanity of murdering 800 civilians, it appeared reasonable. It was not clear what it meant in practice, but to say we need to go against Hamas, whatever that meant, and to release 250 hostages seemed reasonable. The other statements that were being made clearly had a clear genocidal content. They'll have no water, they'll have no food, they're human animals, they'll be treated as such, we'll flatten Gaza, there are no uninvolved people. All of that they were incitement made by a Minister of Defense who was appreciated, unlike the current one. That was a Minister of Defense who was a general and people respected him. When you are recruiting 300,000 men as reservists and making these statements, that serves as incitement, and it could have been also an indication of plans. But you couldn't tell that in advance. And at the time, you could have said, and many people said, these were irresponsible statements made in the heat of the moment after the humiliation and horror of October 7th. And I wrote in November, 4 weeks after the Hamas attack, that Israel was clearly engaged in war crimes, because 10,000 people had died in Gaza, mostly civilians. And there were good indications that these were crimes against humanity because of the extent of killing of civilians, but that I was not sure yet that it was genocide, but it might become that. And what I was looking for was to see a pattern of operations. And by May, it appeared to me that that pattern had been established.
Why so? Like, because Rafah was so sort of gruesome to you? Like, what established the pattern to you?
It wasn't a matter of it being gruesome. It's a matter that in early May 2024, half of the population of Gaza, 1 million people, were concentrated in Rafah. And they were there because they had been displaced multiple times by the IDF. The population originally of Rafah was 270,000 or something. So it's a huge concentration of people. And then the IDF said, well, we need to go into Rafah, we'll move them. And they moved them again to the Al-Mawasi, to the beach area, which had no humanitarian infrastructure whatsoever. And then they moved into Rafah and flattened it. By August, it was gone. And looking at that, you could look back and see what was the pattern of operations from the beginning. And it appeared to have been the goal was to make Gaza uninhabitable, to destroy everything that people can live in, and to destroy everything that would make it possible for the population, even if it survived all of that, to reconstitute itself as a group. And the goal, I think, was then to ethnically cleanse the population. Not genocide in the sense of destroying the group as such, but of removing it from the territory. But there was no place for that population to go to. And the result was a systematic attempt to make it impossible for that group to remain as a group, to destroy it as a group.
Which is one part of the Genocide Convention, right? I mean, bringing about the conditions of destruction.
So, there are 5 actions, types of actions that constitute the attempt to destroy a group in whole or in part as such. So killing members of the group, large numbers of people have been killed. By now, the most conservative estimate is about 67,000, but it's probably higher than 100,000. Plus close to 200,000 by now who've been wounded, many of them with life-changing injuries. So you talk about 250,000 people out of 2 million. That's a high percentage. The second one is about causing severe physical and mental harm to members of the group. And clearly that has happened if you just think about the children. Creating conditions, that's the third one, creating conditions that would lead to the destruction of the group in whole or in part. What we see, what Gaza looks like, these are clearly those conditions. And even the fourth section, which is preventing births in the group, has now, there's a lot of evidence, not only the destruction of fertility clinics, but also the rapid rise in miscarriages, 300%. The 20% of children who are born either prematurely or underweight and did not have any facilities, any medical facilities. The women could not breastfeed them because they were undernourished. So the damage is huge. And in that sense, it clearly showed that the intent was being implemented on the ground.
I want to talk about something connected to Germany, which is like German memory culture or the so-called Vergangenheitsbewältigung. A few years ago, there was a debate in Germany, this so-called like second Historikerstreit, which you were also in to some degree part of. And it was all about the question of comparability. Like, can we sort of compare the first genocide of the 20th century? It's often still overlooked in today's Namibia, but carried out by Germany. Can we compare that? Can we draw kind of like, can we understand something from the comparison between that and the genocide carried out in Eastern Europe and Germany, like against Jewish people and Roma and Sinti and other groups? And often this the kind of argument that was leveled against comparability was that like it would sort of reduce one to the other, or it would one would make the Holocaust smaller than it is. Do you think this is kind of re-emerging now with Gaza, because people are obviously comparing things all the time, and like what do you make of this?
Yeah, of course, it re-emerged, and it's this is something that began long before the so-called Second Historikerstreit, which I didn't think was really a Historikerstreit.
Okay.
It existed long before, and it exists much more now because of the Israeli actions. I've, for decades, I've resisted and opposed this notion that the Holocaust is unique and that you can't compare it to anything. And by now, I think there are very few scholars who would say that. There are politicians who would say that for political reasons, but scholars very rarely say that. And you'd mostly find them, I think, in Yad Vashem, but not even there too much. The Holocaust had unique features to it. Obviously, it's the only genocide that had extermination camps. Recently, I think last April, I wrote an essay which I began with the case of the genocide of the Herero by the German military. And that genocide begins when the Herero rise up against German settlers who are taking away their land, and they kill about 100 settlers. And the Germans on the ground say, aha, now we know that they are, as we always said, savages.
Right, remember Lothar von Trotha and the extermination order.
They bring they bring 10,000 troops from Germany, and they initially want to ethnically cleanse the Herero, to remove them from the lands that the settlers want for themselves. And in the process, they kill most of them. So that's the first genocide of the 20th century, but it is seen by Germans as a response to the barbarity, the savagery, the inhumanity of the other side, and it's a protective defense measure. And I cited that to say that's the kind of discourse that you have in Israel. You don't need the Holocaust for that.
Yeah.
That's the discourse that you had in Israel immediately after the Hamas attack, when it was said to have been the largest killing of Jews since the Holocaust. Now, whether it's true or not, and I'm not sure it's true, the invocation of the Holocaust was intentional, because immediately it triggers these reflexes in Israeli society, and shortly thereafter, Hamas came to be described as Nazis. And so if it's like the Holocaust, and if they are like the Nazis, then that gives you license to destroy, to eradicate Gaza.
Right.
And that's exactly the discourse that kicked in. So it's not that it was like Gaza, that it was like the Holocaust, but rather that rhetoric about the Holocaust seemed to trigger the desire and to provide a license to eradicate Gaza.
In a way, the Holocaust memory was actively and intentionally weaponized in order to justify the killing that followed afterwards.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
And how does that translate to the German context? Because here in Germany, as we both know, I'm not Jewish, I'm German. I take this historical responsibility quite seriously, but I think it's interesting that so often we see how the responsibility and the attempt to come to terms with the past is being translated to just full-blown outright support of Israel. And like, in a way, that's what's been happening in the past 2 years. Germany has supported Israel militarily, rhetorically, legally, and justified that with its historical responsibility. Like, what do you make of that?
So look, I mean, during the so-called Second Historikerstreit, there were arguments about this kind of change in the German politics of memory. I actually admire many of the people, mostly of my generation in Germany, who, as young historians, teachers, and other intellectuals in the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, sacrificed a great deal of time and effort and often abuse to create a new German memorial culture that takes responsibility for what happened in the past. And we forget
around the 80s, right?
Yes. And we forget that this did not exist before in Germany. It wasn't like the World War II ended and everybody in Germany said, oh, we're really sorry and we have to remember it. No, not at all. It took a lot of work.
Yeah.
And I admire that. The problem is that it has now become distorted. And the distortion is that when you talk now about Staatsräson as being the need to support Israel, whatever it does, you're actually betraying this understanding of the legacy of Nazism and the Holocaust. The lesson to be learned from that is not to support the state of Israel, whatever it does, even if it carries out genocide. That's a complete distortion of that lesson. The lesson is to preserve that system of international law that was set up to prevent the repetition of such events, not to facilitate them because they're carried out by the state of Israel. And even if you feel, and you should, I think, as a German politician, if you feel responsibility for the state of Israel, that responsibility now has to be exercised differently, not by giving license to genocidaires like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and Netanyahu himself, but to help Israel liberate itself from those people and recreate itself as a state with justice and dignity for all.
So how would a kind of reckoning for this, let's call it very euphemistically, like misstep or misinterpretation of responsibility, how would like a kind of imagining that look like in your view? Like,
look, I don't know. I wish I could see a reckoning. I'm still hoping that there will be a reckoning, at least for the Israeli political and military leaders who did what they did. I would be happy if it ended with that. That's already something, and we're not sure that will happen. But for Germany, I think the way for Germany to reckon with the destruction of Gaza, with the tens of thousands who were killed, is to actually take an active part in trying to change the political paradigm and try to help Israel and the Palestinians do something that, after all, Germany did after World War II. That is to try and come out of this horrific moment in history and say, we are going to help you to create a different world for yourselves in the future. You can take care, and I hope also international institutions will take care of punishing those who committed those crimes. But we can help you also in seeing a different future.
Right. I mean, like, there's an argument to be made, and these arguments are right now happening on a legal basis in front of the ICJ with the Nicaragua case, but also from within Germany with certain Strafanträge that are running, that Germany is actively complicit in genocide. Yes. You agree with this assessment?
Yes, and not only complicit, but also facilitated it. I mean, one has to remember, Germany is the second biggest supplier of arms to Israel. The Israeli Navy is made in Germany.
The submarines and like
submarines
ships, right?
and these ships were actively engaged, of course, in shelling Gaza. They were not just sailing on the water; they were engaged also in the siege of Gaza. Israeli tanks are motorized by German-made engines.
Right, Merkava tanks get the engines from Germany. Yes.
So Germany was facilitating by supplies of arms, and of course politically by giving Israel cover.
Yeah.
And in that sense, of course, it is complicit.
What a strange twist of events, no? That like by trying to fulfill historical responsibility for having committed a genocide, Germany is once again facilitating another genocide against the Palestinians in Gaza.
So you'd say the second irony, the first irony is that Israel, in the name of preventing another Holocaust, is carrying out a genocide because Israel, the kind of politics of memory that was created in Israel also since the 1980s was giving license to Israelis to see any threat to them, including threat to the occupation and oppression of Palestinians, to see that as an existential threat that has to be wiped out with excessive violence.
Yeah.
And the Germany, in its desire for its own sort of sense of morality and of coming to terms with its own past, ends up giving license to Israel and facilitating Israeli genocidal policies.
Yeah.
Yes, it is a horrible historical irony.
You know, you wrote this article in the New York Review of Books where you described the scene in Tel Aviv in a cafe, sitting in a cafe, I think, in Chama V'Chetzi, in front of like Habima Square. And you described like a deep sense of estrangement, I think I would call it, like from Israeli society. Is this still the case? Can you go to Tel Aviv now and feel like it's a quote unquote normal place? Like how do you deal with, because your family still lives there, right? I mean, like you teach in the US, but like how do you feel vis-a-vis Israeli society today?
So for one thing, I'll say personally, after that visit, after some thinking, I decided that I can't go to Israel anymore. And at least as long as this government is in power, I can't make myself go. Partly also because I'm not sure I would be safe, because if anybody in Israel decided to act against me, if they ever read what I write,
really? Yeah.
They could lock me up, and I can't expect the Americans to come to my help either. It's not likely, but it's possible. But partly more, I would say, because of this sense that I had of, by December 2024, during my second visit to Israel, most people knew. They knew what was going on in Gaza.
Yeah.
Unlike, say, in June, the previous visit, when fewer people knew. They didn't want to know. They could have, but by December, it was very hard not to know. So it was willing lack of knowledge, willing indifference. People felt maybe resignation, worry, anxiety, but not about Palestinians. And as the movement against the government grew, it was not accompanied by any sense of empathy for Palestinians. And I just wrote about this, actually, about denial in Israel and how deep it has become. And it's not a denial only of what happened in the past. It's a denial of what is happening right now. And this kind of denial, and that's the most fascinating aspect of denial, is you deny something while admitting it at the same time. So you say, well, there's no genocide in Gaza. But if there is, it's not our fault. It's Hamas's fault. And there's no children starving, and we're not killing children deliberately. But imagine, after we killed all their families, all these children, what they would do to us. So we don't have a choice.
And as a Holocaust historian or genocide historian, does that remind you of statements in different historical times and contexts? Yeah.
Yeah, it's completely common that people both know and don't know at the same time. They admit and they don't admit. You know, in Germany, while this city was being bombed, in 1945, 1944, people said this bombing is Judenvergeltung. But what were the Jews taking revenge for? Because people said they didn't know what happened to the Jews.
Somehow doesn't go together.
But they were taking revenge.
Yeah.
This is precisely this kind of mechanism that you deny, you assent to it. You say there was no Nakba in 1948, but we should have finished the job.
Right.
You say there is no ethnic cleansing in Gaza, but it's a second Nakba. You say those things at the same time, and one of them justifies the other.
You know, we're now like after a ceasefire that was brought about by Donald Trump, and it seems very fragile and very still kind of vague and unclear what exactly is going to happen. But it was not brought about by boycott and sanctions and divestment for and from Israel, which are things you have publicly called for, right? I mean, like in the wake of the genocide. How do you feel about this current moment that we're in right now? Like,
look, I mean, it's a very strange moment because I also live in the United States, and Trump is really wrecking the rule of law in the U.S. He's wrecking the universities, which we feel directly. He's using mafia tactics. And with people like Netanyahu, they really work. So it is another irony that it's someone like Trump who obviously told Netanyahu what Biden should have told him in November or December 2023. if you continue doing this, you're on your own. You're not going to get us pulling out the veto in the Security Council. You're not going to get your 2,000-pound bombs. You're not going to get your interceptors. You're not going to get more F-35s. Forget it. Try. And Netanyahu is no fool. He understood that he has to stop. Now, the question is whether Trump can sustain that, because he has a famously, short attention span. And the question is whether what's in those 20 paragraphs of 20 points of this agreement is serious, because as such, it's very vague. It's not clear how everything would work, but it has one important aspect to it. It speaks about a political future. Yeah. It's not only about a ceasefire. And that is important. And the question is whether this would be sustained and implemented. It will be only under pressure, of course. But if the pressure is kept up, and that vision, at least, with a vague mention of an eventual Palestinian statehood, that is a good thing.
Yeah. One last question, because I know you have to go to another interview, but I'm wondering, do you think we would be at this point with a ceasefire if there wouldn't have been this international outrage over Israel's conduct, and there wouldn't have been a near sort of consensus understanding in the human rights community that this is actually genocide? I'm also asking because I'm curious always about, within this discussion, it's not only the question whether this assessment is correct, right? I mean, whether it is genocide according to the legal definition or the societal definition by Raphael Lemkin, but it's also a question whether, this term manages to mobilize something politically. Do you think this might have been a crucial part of the story, that we are now at a ceasefire, that people have come to the conclusion that it is actually a genocide?
I think it's a good question, and I think it's important to stress it, because people have rightly become deeply disillusioned with the whole rule of international law, that Israel enjoyed such impunity for 2 years. Nobody expected that. Yeah. No one, not even the far right in Israel. 2 years of impunity to do whatever you like. Right. So to say that nonetheless, all the people speaking out, all the demonstrations, all the scholars writing what they wrote did have an impact. I think it did have an impact. But we have to also accept that, in this agreement, there were no good faith actors here. I mean, no one is acting just because they care for the Palestinians. Right. And so there's a lot of cynicism in that. And there always is in politics a lot of cynicism. And people think that they can get something out of it, whether it's real estate, investment, Qatari money, whatever it might be. And we have to accept that. We have to accept that we are not, you can't change things just because you have good intentions. You have to show, whether it's to the American president, who's worried not only about protests on the American left, he's worried about unhappiness in MAGA, in Make America Great, among his own supporters who don't like that war and think it's a waste of time for them. Right. You have to mobilize even those forces to show in your own interest, the German interest, the British interest, the American interest, in their own national interest. It's not a good thing to support this kind of regime and this kind of policy. Yeah. That together with good faith actors, people are really morally outraged, maybe has led to the beginning of a change.
Tell us once again the name of the book that you're about to publish just now about the past few years, and we hope it's going to come out in German as well, but tell us the English title just for us to know what to look out for.
In English, it's called Israel, What Went Wrong.
Right. It's very telling. Thank you so much, Omer Bartov. Very, very appreciated that you're here.
Thank you. Thanks very much.